Hi, this is Paul McGuire, and I want to give you an update, a prophetic update on what is happening in our world in terms of globalism, the UN, and what I refer to in a new article as the rebuilding of Babylon. Now, before we get into some of the current events, which we're going to look at from a prophetic perspective, and it's very important to have a thorough knowledge of history and civilization when we analyze current events, because you don't analyze current events out of a vacuum. You have to understand the history and origins of civilization so you can make comparisons, so you can discover the truth. For example, what we see going on in our world right now is the super rising, if you will, of a one world government, a one world religion, and a one world economic system. Now, that first happened in ancient Babylon, thousands and thousands of years ago, when a ruler whose name was Nimrod built the Tower of Babel, or Babel, which literally means the gate of the gods. And he built it as a worship tower to worship the hosts of heaven. And it was the world's first global community. In fact, it was the world's first community built on sustainable development. And it was a one world government, one world economic system, and one world religion. And all the people that lived in Babylon spoke a common language, so there was no confusion. But God judged ancient Babylon, because when God looked down from heaven and looked into the hearts of mankind, he saw that men and women, and Nimrod himself, that underneath it all, they wanted to be God. They wanted to have a revolution against God and to be God. That's why they built this giant tower that would enable them to ascend into the heavens. And God saw it for what it was. It was man's sinful rebellion against the divine order. You see, the divine order is the fact that there is a personal living God of the universe, the Creator, capital C, who created creation, small c, and he created men and women and the human race. And he is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, as we discover as we read further on in the biblical text. The owner of planet Earth is not man. The owner of planet Earth is not this mystical consciousness, or Gaia, which some people worship as if planet Earth was a living entity to be worshipped, a goddess, if you will, named Gaia. No, planet Earth is the creation of a creator, the personal living God of the universe. And he expresses himself in a triune nature, which is the Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. And at the end of the age, which we are rapidly approaching now, the Son of God, Jesus Christ, will return to planet Earth as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Now, I want to take that in perspective, and let's look at a recent news announcement. And the recent news announcement goes like this. At the UN, at a meeting last week, there was a very alarming announcement. And this is from a news source, but the announcement was that the Attorney General of the United States, Loretta Lynch, she announced at the United Nations that her office would be working in several American cities to form what she called the Strong Cities Network, SCN, and that it is a law enforcement initiative that would encompass the globe. Now, what this means, as you analyze the language of this initiative, is that it is the UN sharing the role of law enforcement, the UN sharing the role of a global police, enforcing UN laws on certain American cities, and one assumes that that role will be expanded. Now, if you read the Constitution of the United States of America, it is not constitutional to have any foreign government rule any American city or rule any American state. That is exclusively, according to the Constitution, to be done by the states and the federal government through a constitutional process. So the United Nations is not the United States of America. It's an external entity, and it does not have jurisdiction, according to the Constitution of America, over the United States of America. So constitutional lawyers could well argue that this entire plan by the UN to have UN police enforce UN laws in US cities is unconstitutional, and many people are already saying that it is. In fact, the largest argument is that this initiative was passed unilaterally by this present administration and the UN, and they did not legally consult the Congress. They went around the Congress. So that is something to keep in mind. But what does this indicate? This indicates the growth of the United Nations. And the United Nations is, for all practical purposes, a de facto global government. And in the United Nations Charter, it is set forth to be a global entity that rules and governs planet Earth. Now, whether it turns out to be the global entity that rules and controls planet Earth remains to be seen, but we need to take a very close examination of the role of the UN, because it's expanding its authority very, very quickly, and its authority is being expanded, and most people in the United States of America and in Europe are unaware of to the extent that it's being expanded. The media, which is controlled by just 6 corporations, and those 6 corporations are owned by what would be called the elite, who basically control the international monetary system and the UN. They're not reporting on the expansion of the UN. They're kind of like hiding it, but it's going on very aggressively. So what does this mean? Well, according to this initiative, the Strong Cities Network, there seems to be an incredible amount of favoritism towards the Islamic religion. And the UN displays almost a hostility against Judeo-Christian values, Christianity, Judaism, by the Bible, biblical values, yet it champions and puts in a priority position the religion of Islam. And that is disturbing also, that UN troops and UN police would give favored treatment to Islamic groups, and then they make some disturbing remarks if you read them carefully. And that is what I'm going to read you now. The Strong Cities Network uses governance on all kinds of levels, but the Department of Justice says that the Strong Cities Network will address, quote, violent extremism in all its forms. It also says that it will aid initiatives that are working toward building social cohesion and resilience to violent extremism. Now, building social cohesion simply means keeping peace between non-Muslim and Muslim communities, and making sure that non-Muslims don't complain too loudly about the expanding Muslim populations and the passing of Islamic laws in their cities, because of course the goal of Islam is to establish Sharia law in the United States and other nations. So this Strong Cities Network is biased and displays favoritism towards the Islamic religion. So it's a disturbing development, but it's also a clue into the ever-expanding role of the United Nations. Now, the United Nations has become, as I said a few moments ago, a de facto global government or world government. And it is doing it through a stealth-like manner. In other words, the United Nations is not coming out and openly announcing to the public what their plans are, but neither are they hiding what their plans are. I mean, if anyone bothers to read the UN Charter, you can see what its plans are. Its plans are for global governance or global government. So it's not hiding them. Anybody who wants to read what the agenda of the UN is, all they have to do is get on the internet or pick up a book, and it's openly available for anybody to read. The problem is people in America and around the world have been dumbed down, so to speak, and they don't read. And therefore, because they don't read and they're relying on a biased media to give full disclosure to the goals and ambitions of the UN, they're ill-informed. So what is the UN? The UN is a global government. It was established to be a one-world government. And from the beginning, the planners of the UN planned that there would be a global society with a global economic system and a global religion. And they foresaw that the UN would be the governing entity that would be the governmental structure of planet Earth. And what we see in the last couple of years especially is an acceleration of the UN's self-anointed and self-appointed responsibilities. Let me give you an example. I wrote an article called Rebuilding an Eco-Friendly, Sustainable Babylon. And the point that I was trying to make is one which we have documented in our brand new book, The Babylon Code, which I co-wrote with Troy Anderson, a Pulitzer Prize nominated journalist, where we intensively research the history of ancient Babylon, the return of Babylon in our lifetime, the role of secret societies such as the Illuminati and Skull and Bones, the true purpose of the United Nations and the Council on Foreign Relations. And we do intensive documentation to reveal to you what for many is a secret master plan being conducted by the United Nations. And we interface this with Bible prophecy, where in Genesis we read about ancient Babylon, the world's first one world government, one world religion, and one world economic system. And in the book, The Babylon Code, we reveal how there's a coding system that God put into His Word, which in the last days, Babylon reemerges, and we see the reemergence of Babylon in Revelation 17 and 18 as a global government, global religion, and global economic system. But, as I stated a few moments ago, the United Nations just doesn't come out and openly telegraph or communicate what their plans are. They kind of put it on the back shelf. So they use terms that are friendly to people. They say they're going to build a better world. They're going to implement social justice. They're going to make access to income equal for all people, which means all people will share the wealth in a redistributed fashion equally. And they say we're going to have a cleaner, more environmentally friendly world. And it all sounds wonderful. It all sounds like they're going to build paradise on earth and utopia on earth until you read the fine print. Now, the United Nations recently hosted a very disturbing conference on sustainable development where they said they were going to radically transform planet Earth by the year 2030 through sustainable development. And sustainable development is one of those code words that the UN uses instead of coming right out and saying what they mean. Well, what is sustainable development? What is Agenda 21? What does eco-friendly mean? Well, eco-friendly and sustainable development and Agenda 21 although they're presented as very beautiful, environmentally friendly green terms, what they really mean by sustainable development is massive planetary wealth redistribution on planet Earth. And what they're doing now is transferring billions of dollars out of the hard-working middle class in America, the hard-working lower class in America, and in other nations, and they're transferring that wealth into third world nations and artificially lowering the standard of living of the hardworking middle class and the hardworking lower class. And you just need to look around at the job market and the employment market and the standard of living that people have, and you see that the middle class in America and other nations and the hardworking lower class is suffering. Their standard of living is getting lower and lower, where in contrast, that 1%, that elite, is increasing its wealth. That 1%, or the elite, they own 99% of all the wealth. Just 1%, and they are the elite. Now, what sustainable development does is it continues to take the money from the hardworking lower class and the hardworking middle class and put it into third world nations, and oftentimes third world dictatorships. So in the effort to be fair, to achieve income equality, they take the money from the middle class and the lower class and they spread that wealth. But notice that in their plans, they never touch the wealth of the very super wealthy, the 1% that own 99% of all the resources. The 1%, they're protected. They have special laws. So it is the middle class and lower middle class that is having its money and income lowered, and the super wealthy, or the 1% that live like kings and queens, they're not touched. So the question has to be asked, is the UN plan really fair? No, it's not fair. It's completely not just. It's robbery. It's theft. But here's the deal, and you're never going to hear about it in the media. The UN is controlled by the 1% that own 99% of the wealth. The elite control the UN, and the elite control the international monetary systems, and the elite control the mass media. And so this is a game being played where a new kind of feudal state is being erected on planet Earth. They call it a techno-feudal state. And in the days of feudalism in Europe, you had kings and queens, and then the serfs, or the peasants, who were often starving, would work and farm the land of the kings and queens in Europe that lived like gods and goddesses. And that was a very unfair system, but it was called the feudal system. Well, the world right now, despite what the United Nations is saying, is moving into what is called a techno-feudal system, where we still have the elite, the 1%, the kings or queens that own 99% of the wealth, but the masses of people are being scientifically brainwashed to accept their lot in life, and they're being programmed to believe that everything is just and equal. In fact, it's not. Now you say, Paul, that's kind of an extreme statement. Well, yes, it is an extreme statement, but the question is not whether or not is it an extreme statement. The real question that should be asked, is it a truthful statement? Because remember, there was a time when the majority of people on planet Earth believed that the world was flat. They were called flat earthers. Flat earthers, who were the majority of the population of planet Earth, believed that planet Earth was a flat surface. And if you dared to suggest that the world, planet Earth, was perhaps a globe or oval in shape, you were considered radical and extreme. Now, what was the really important question? Was the really important question whether or not you accepted the majority viewpoint that the world was flat? Or was the really important question, what is true and what is false? Is it true that the Earth is flat? Or is it true that the Earth was a globe or oval? Well, science has proven that the Earth is oval in shape. It's a globe. It's not flat. So at that time, the vast majority thought anybody who believed the Earth was global, or not global, a globe, or oval in shape, they were extreme. So back to the UN, it doesn't matter whether or not you think a statement is extreme. The question you need to really ask is it true or not? So let's look at the goals of the UN. They had this summit recently for radical planetary transformation by 2030. They're going to step into hyperdrive and transform the planet, and I showed you some ways they're going to do that. But then they're going to have another massive conference called Paris 2015. And this is also known as the COP21, CMP11 Climate Summit that will take place in Paris, France from November to December 30th. And this will be the largest diplomatic event ever to be held in France, with over 40,000 participants. And they are going to, the scientists and the social engineers and the politicians and the heads of corporations and the heads of state are going to gather together in Paris with the goal, they're going to come up with laws and regulations that they're going to hold global warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius. And that is a pretty ambitious attempt. And how are they going to do that? Well, they're going to radically cut production and manufacturing. But the problem with this whole climate change treaty is that it's based on the faulty premise that global warming indeed is a problem. And it's also based on the faulty premise that CO2 emissions, man-made CO2 emissions, are the cause of climate change. But there are a massive number of scientists, and their information is often suppressed, but there is a massive number of scientists who completely refute this climate change theory, and they believe that the changes in the atmosphere of Earth have nothing to do with man-made CO2. They're caused by other factors. And if that is the case, and that is what a growing consensus of scientists believe, then all these treaties and climate change ideas will simply cause mass starvation, mass unemployment, war, and misery for billions of people. And it won't solve the environmental problem. And why will it cause millions, hundreds of millions of people to die, and wars and food shortages and disease outbreaks? It will cause that because when you destroy the ability of a society to manufacture goods and services in order to survive, when you destroy the ability of entire populations to grow their own food, to harvest their own crops, when you artificially create man-made food shortages, when you artificially modify the weather with technology. Now, some people think that's a far-fetched statement, but Vladimir Putin, the head of Russia, didn't think weather modification technology was far-fetched. He openly admitted that Russia uses weather modification technology in a quote in the Wall Street Journal. And Vladimir Putin went on to say that the United States uses weather modification technology. And Putin went further. He said the United States uses weather modification weapons. So could it be that, in the words of Henry Kissinger, one of the elite globalists and promoters of the New World Order, he said recently that food shortages can be artificially created, and that food shortages across planet Earth are one of the world's most effective mechanisms for controlling populations. The CIA, in partnership with MIT, also did a sophisticated algorithm study where they were able to analyze social unrest, and they considered the greatest predictor of riots, revolution, anarchy, and social unrest the most reliable predictor for that was a explosive rise in food prices, and a explosive rise in food shortages. And Kissinger knows this, and it's a mechanism of social control by a global elite. That's disturbing to say, but it's true. Also, water shortages can create a controlling mechanism. So, under the guise of sustainable development, under the guise of environmentally friendly and being green, under the guise of climate treaties, you have a massive control mechanism which disrupts the ability of hundreds of millions of people on planet Earth to eat food, to drink clean water, to have meaningful employment. And the result is, inevitably, that wars break out, starvation breaks out, disease, epidemics, chaos, and hundreds of millions of people die. And that's a disturbing thought, and I don't personally think that is a benevolent action or program on behalf of the United Nations. Do you? Now, let's look at the philosophy behind the United Nations. Maybe that will give us a clue as to why, under the guise of climate change and climate treaties and sustainable development, that they're willing to take such radical steps to recreate planet Earth, to rebuild Babylon, if you will. And again, in our book, The Babylon Code, we document from interviews with scientists, interviews with philosophers, interviews with historians and world leaders, we document the plans for globalism that we're discussing here. We give full documentation, and then we provide a deep look at the spiritual foundation and the spiritual belief system that lies behind the UN and its planners and thinkers. And in part 2 of our discussion, we're going to uncover the dark secrets behind the United Nations. Who are the United Nations? What do they believe? What is their philosophy? What is their religion? What is their end game? Who are they really? And in part 2 of this discussion, we're going to reveal that to you, because it's important that you know who the UN is. Are they really this just friendly, benevolent organization that wants world peace, and they have their blue helmeted soldiers? Are they really that friendly and wonderful? Well, I'm going to let you be the judge in that as we delve into it. But let's remember that the UN plan for sustainable development and climate change may be simply eco-friendly terms to try to hide the true nature of their agenda, which they wrote about openly in Agenda 21. And what is that agenda? Well, they wrote about that openly also. The agenda is a radical reduction of the population of planet Earth from 7 billion people to 500 million people. And they want to do that in a very short period of time. So the question has to be asked, how will the United Nations be able to reduce the population of planet Earth from 7 billion people to 500 million people in a short period of time? Well, we get a clue from one of the intellectuals who developed the plan for a global society, and that's Bertrand Russell. And Bertrand Russell was a Fabian socialist, a British intellectual, and he, along with H.G. Wells, the great science fiction writer, and Aldous Huxley's brother Julian Huxley, devised this blueprint for a new global order. And in their writings, both H.G. Wells and Bertrand Russell openly stated that they believed it would be necessary to create wars, endless wars, nuclear wars. It would be necessary to have plagues and diseases. It would be necessary to have social chaos, so that the population of planet Earth could be radically reduced. So I hope you paid attention to what these intellectuals were really advocating, because when you read their writings, and we quote and document their writings in the book, The Babylon Code, when you read what they actually said, it's frightening in nature to think that any man or woman would devise a plan for the eradication of billions of people on planet Earth. Is that sustainable development? I don't think so. I don't think that's good. I don't think that's building a peaceful, better world. Do you do you? That sounds like global fascism to me. Now, before we get into the secret, and it's really not so secret if you bother to do your homework, the secret spiritual beliefs of the founders of the UN, what they really believe, because you see, all their actions and their plans and their activities make perfect sense when you understand their guiding philosophy and their spiritual beliefs. Once you understand their guiding philosophy and spiritual beliefs, then, as disturbing as it is, you can project where the UN is going. In 1994, the Earth Charter was developed. And this is important because in 1994, the Earth Charter was the prototype for many of the climate change treaties the UN is proposing now. And they had what was called the Rio Earth Summit. And there was a super Canadian billionaire named Maurice Strong, who was a heavily involved in the occult and the New Age movement, and owns, I don't know, billions of acres in Colorado, which he's turned into a New Age and spiritual center. He also lives a great deal of the time in one of the luxurious parts of a major Chinese city. And this super billionaire, Maurice Strong, launched the Earth Charter Initiative, and he formed what was called the Earth Council. Then in 1997, the Earth Council, along with Mikhail Gorbachev, the former head of Russia or the Soviet Union, established what was called the Green Cross International and formed an Earth Charter Commission. Now, they laid out a plan along with Stephen Rockefeller, the chairman of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, Mikhail Gorbachev, and other environmental groups. They came up with a document, a 2,400-word document, which divided into pillars that represent 16 main principles. And basically, the Earth Charter sets forth the master plan for a global government based on a communist ideology and New Age and occult beliefs. Now, it uses spiritual words, but if you read the words carefully, they're not Christian words, they're occultic words. And Maurice Strong also announced these words. Now listen to what he said. Quote, "The real goal of the Earth Charter is that it will in fact become like the Ten Commandments." And then he said, he started to read these commandments. So do you see what's happening here? The arrogance of Maurice Strong and the United Nations and the Earth Charter. They reject the idea and reality of the God who is there, the infinite, personal, living God of the universe, the God of the Bible. They reject that God. And they reject, quite defiantly, God's Ten Commandments as put forth in the Old Testament. And they replace the biblical God with a God of their own making, a pagan God, a New Age God. And then after they've rejected God's Ten Commandments, they have the arrogance to develop their own Ten Commandments. But their own Ten Commandments center around the worship of planet Earth, or Gaia. So Gorbachev started reading some of these globalist environmental Ten Commandments. And one of them says, Do not do unto the environment of others what you do not want done to your own environment. It becomes ridiculous. And not only is it ridiculous, it's a complete lie, because this globalist elite, they personally own billions of acres of some of the most choice land on planet Earth. The majestic forests and the lakes and the beaches and the most pristine parts of nature, these super billionaires, they own them privately, but they won't allow you to go into them because they are reserved and they don't allow the public to go in. So this entire idea of sharing the environment is complete hypocrisy. They have no intention of sharing the environment. They are the elite, or the feudal techno kings and queens, and you are the serfs of a new world order plantation. That's really what it's all about. And then Gorbachev said this: "My hope is that the Charter will be a kind of 10 Commandments, a Sermon on the Mount that provides a guide for human behavior towards the environment of the next century." And isn't that interesting that they replaced the Judeo-Christian truths of the Bible? And then Maurice Strong, and this is where we really have to zero in. Maurice Strong says these words: "We are all gods now, gods in charge of our own destiny." Wow. We are all gods now. You see, that's what it's all about. That's the root of the reemergence of Babylon. That's the root of a satanic global system. And that was the root of why God judged Babylon in the Old Testament. Remember, in the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve are seduced by a reptilian being who is Lucifer in a reptilian form. And Lucifer seduces Adam and Eve by twisting God's word and tempts Adam and Eve to eat the fruit in the middle of the garden by saying that you shall be as gods. So the great seduction for mankind was to be like God. That was also the great seduction for Lucifer, because he wanted to be like God, and he right now is leading a revolution with 1/3 of the angels. He's leading a revolution in the invisible realm to implement Luciferian regime change, where he thinks he's going to depose God from his throne and install himself on the throne of God. And that will actually happen in the future, when the Antichrist will set himself up to be worshipped as God in the rebuilt Jewish temple in Jerusalem. He will put an end to all the Jewish animal sacrifices, and the Antichrist will set himself up as the abomination of desolation predicted by the prophet Daniel in Daniel chapter 9, and he will set himself up to be worshipped as God. Lucifer wants to be worshipped as God. And so the temptation from Babylon to today is for man to be as gods. So God looked into the hearts of the men and women and Nimrod of ancient Babylon, and he saw that everything that they were doing in terms of building the Tower of Babel, which ascended into the heavens, the Babylonian system of a one-world government and a one-world religion and a one-world economic system, God looked down from heaven and he could see in the inner chambers of man's heart that they wanted to rebel against the divine order, and that they lusted, mankind lusted, and they wanted to be like gods. You shall be as gods. That's the temptation. And so, here we are, thousands of years later, after the fall of man, after the Savior, Jesus Christ, died, was crucified for our sins, and then rose again, and will return to earth as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And we see in the book of Revelation, especially Revelation 17 and 18, we see that the root sin, again, is that Lucifer, or Satan, is leading a revolution in which he's going to enroll all the armies of the earth to come against Christ at his second coming, at his return to Jerusalem with the armies of heaven, and that he enrolls mankind, and that he wants to be God, and the entire Babylonian system, which is emerging before our very eyes, the UN's plan to rebuild Babylon, as it is disclosed in Revelation 17 and 18. The root of the Babylonian system is that man wants to be God. And that's the heart of the whole matter. So we read in Revelation 17, let's start at verse 2. And it's speaking of Babylon, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Babylon's fornication. The kings of the earth, the powerful, the elite, were fornicating. They were having intercourse with Babylon, the harlot religion. They wanted to gain power from her. And they fed on her energies like kind of psychic vampires. So he carried me away into the spirit in the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman, who was arrayed in purple, scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, in her hand was a golden cup full of the abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Now, right here, we discover Mystery Babylon. And Mystery Babylon is going to be judged by Jesus Christ at his return, where Mystery Babylon is going to fall by the judgment of God. Now, in our book, The Babylon Code, we disclose the coding system that exists in Mystery Babylon. Because you see, the elite, or who Aldous Huxley, the author of Brave New World, and he was also a scientist and a philosopher. He came to America in the 1930s to introduce the psychedelic drug mescaline among Hollywood and the intellectual community. But Aldous Huxley also lectured neuroscientists or neuropsychiatrists at the University of California in Berkeley, and he told them about the creation of a scientific dictatorship where men could be scientifically programmed and brainwashed and learn to love their slavery through scientific mind control. And we talk about the roots of this in the book, The Babylon Code. And that's what Babylon, Mystery Babylon, the sorcery, the supernatural Satanism, and other aspects that are hidden from the masses is very much a part of the Babylonian system. And Jesus Christ is going to come back to judge it. But this entire system began at the Tower of Babel with Nimrod. Because the Tower of Babel, when you properly understand it, is not just an architectural tower. The Tower of Babel, and we provide documentation and quotes for you in the book, The Babylon Code. The Tower of Babel was an occult technological device. It was an interdimensional portal which allowed for the entrance of fallen angels into the earth. And that's why the literal translation of Babylon, or the Tower of Babel, means, quote, the gate of the gods. It's an interdimensional stargate. And you have to understand that the Tower of Babel was technology. And that when these fallen angels first descended upon planet Earth on Mount Hermon, they gave technology to mankind and science to mankind. You see, this is the great secret that involves Mystery Babylon that most people don't understand. Sir Arthur C. Clarke, who was the screenwriter for 2001: A Space Odyssey, and he was also a scientist from Britain. He used the expression, "science is magic." And he wasn't just being cute with his words. He was revealing a secret which the elite already know. You see, the scientific elite that Huxley was talking about, they are the elite that Plato talked about when he referred to the 10 god kings, or the 10 philosopher kings, who ruled the legendary super civilization of Atlantis. An elite ruling the masses. This is also known as the Pharaoh God King system, which we point out in the book, The Babylon Code. And Huxley talked about a technocratic elite, a scientific elite that would rule the world through a combination of sorcery, supernatural power, and science. But remember, according to those who are at the top of the hierarchy, embodied by the symbol of the pyramid on the back of the US dollar, those that are the Illumined ones, the Illuminati, at the very top of the pyramid, they understand that there is no divorce between science and the supernatural, that they're one and the same. So when you do a word translation for technocratic elite or scientific elite, it comes from the word techne, and techne comes from the word Wicca, from which the word witchcraft comes. And the technocratic elite employ Wicca or witchcraft, and techne also implies the reconfiguring of reality through occult technology. Now, I know that's a huge slam dunk to ponder, but again, the question has to be asked. It's not a matter of, is that a hard question? The question that has to be asked is it true or not? And I would challenge you that if you do your homework, and one resource would be to read the Babylon Code. I also have free resources on my website, paulmcguire.us. You will see that this reality is a holographic projection that came from ideas, the idea of God, and then distorted by the ideas of man. And in that nebulous world between those two realms lies the secret of Mystery Babylon and what the United Nations is really all about. Because as you peel back the layers of the onion, so to speak, you discover that in the depths of the core of the UN belief system is a deep understanding of what happened in ancient Babylon and in ancient Egypt with the pyramids and the Pharaoh God King system. And when you look at the architecture that began in ancient Babylon, the phallic-like tower and the dome structure of Semiramis, who was the wife of Nimrod, you see Mystery Babylon leaves an architectural symbol or signature, a phallic tower and a dome monument. So you look at the United States and you see a Capitol dome and the Washington Monument, which is a phallic symbol. That is a sign of the Illuminati and Freemasonry. The Vatican has the same symbolic architecture. Even the United Nations has a dome structure and a rather square phallic symbol. But you see this mirrored all over planet Earth, and it is a clue to the secret destiny of America that is hidden from most people, but revealed in the architecture and the words of the founding fathers. In fact, presidents in our time period reveal the secret destiny of America because they understand it. When George Bush, the father, talked about 1,000 points of light, he wasn't making a Christian reference. He was talking about the divine illumination coming from the Illumined ones, or the Illuminati. You see, there's a deep secret in globalism and in the global government. And if you understand it and you renew your mind with God's word, then you can be an overcomer and effective in the last days. I'm Paul McGuire. Please visit the website, paulmcguire.us. Get a copy of the newly released book, The Babylon Code, and join me in part 2 as we unveil the deep mystery behind the spiritual belief system of the UN and what is known as Mystery Babylon.